Hey guys, this is the preparation lecture for week 2. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of American government. This is going to give you an overview of government versus politics, some basic principles that will help you to more deeply understand each of those concepts, and we'll hit some of the big picture things that we need to deal with. In class, we'll focus a little bit more on the principles of democracy, but this should give you a good overview and a good starting point for all of this material. If you have any questions, please write them down and I'll be happy to answer them at the start of class next week. So, the objectives of this lecture is to help you to figure out what is politics. We'll talk about political systems and something called the 5 principles of politics. We'll then focus on what is government, the role of government, and what government is supposed to do. This one won't focus on civic engagement. We're going to wait a little bit to talk about that. If you remember, we talked about these 8 overarching questions that were going to help guide our conversations during the semester. And we're going to focus primarily on what is government for and what should it do and how is power distributed and who gets to decide. Remember, this is not everything that there is to know about government and politics, but trying to provide an overview for you so that you have a good place to begin. You want to make sure that you're watching the videos to deepen your understanding that are located in each week's course content. And you want to use the textbook, which is located at openstacks.org under the Social Sciences tab to help supplement any sort of gaps that you feel like there are in your understanding. So let's start off with the question of what is politics? Very simply put, politics is who gets what, when, and how. It really is the process of making collective decisions, managing power, and distributing resources within groups or societies. It involves activities like debating laws, holding elections, negotiating policies, and it's all centered around that idea of who gets what stuff, when they get it, and how they receive it. It encompasses how governments function, how power is shared, how different ways of thinking clash with each other, so conservative versus liberal, and how individuals participate to influence the direction that their society will take at both a local and a national level. Politics deals with power and authority. Politics is really fundamentally about power, how people get it, how they use it, and how it's distributed. It also asks questions about legitimacy. Legitimacy is the idea, do you have the right to wield that power? So it's one thing to be able to wield power. Maybe you're the biggest or the strongest or the smartest. But does society at large feel like you have a right to wield that power? Politics also helps people to make decisions. It's the system for making choices that affect groups of people. That could be a family or it could be a country. Politics also involves formal institutions. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. These institutions help to exercise control and to really make the decisions that help a society function. Politics is also going to deal with different ideologies or belief systems. These belief systems can be liberal, conservative. We'll talk about those later in the semester, but they help to shape political goals like the role of the government or how we achieve things like equality and freedom. In essence, politics is the human activity of organizing ourselves. It's how we resolve conflicts and decide how we live together in communities with a specific focus on power, governance, and collective choices. Within politics are what we call political systems. Political systems are basically just a way of organizing and governing society. They're the framework of rules and institutions and practices that govern a state. They determine how power will be distributed and exercised. We tend to focus on a couple specific types of political systems. These systems are going to vary in participation, how open the systems are, and the sources of their power and legitimacy. We're going to focus on three in particular: democracy, which is the broad political system of the United States, which is where power rests with the people. It can be expressed directly, where the people actually run the government, through a representative system, which is like the United States, where we elect people who then represent us, or a parliamentary system, which is a shared system of power, like the United Kingdom. Next up are authoritarian regimes. These are political systems where power is concentrated in either a single leader or a small group of people. Typically, individual political freedoms are limited, but there is some openness in terms of the social and economic authority that individual people can have. There are different kinds of authoritarian regimes. There are oligarchies, which are systems that are ruled by a small, powerful elite class. Think ancient Sparta. There are theocracies, which is government run by religious leaders, where the laws are based on religious texts. So think the Vatican, where the Pope lives. And then communism is a system that aims for a classless society, where there aren't really distinctions between the rich and the poor, and they tend to be one-party states, meaning one political party dominates the area or region. Finally are totalitarian political systems. These are systems that the state or the government controls all aspect of both your public and your private life. So they control business and industry, but they also control individual freedoms. All right, so now let's jump to the 5 principles of politics. The first principle is something called the rationality principle. The rationality principle simply says political actors, from voters to elected officials, are all goal-oriented, meaning the decisions that they make are typically intentional. They're trying to achieve a specific outcome. They want to win an election or pass a policy or increase a budget. So the way that they behave is on purpose to get certain things. We act a certain way to try to get certain outcomes. Next up is the institution principle. Institutions are the rules and procedures that provide incentives for political behavior. So they're the structures that cause people to act in the ways that they do. These tend to define how authority is exercised through things like jurisdiction, which means who has power over certain things, agenda power, who gets to decide what we talk about and focus on, and delegation, who has the ability to give power to other people. Third up is something we call the collective action principle. So political actions involve combining resources and trying to work together with lots of different individuals and groups to try to reach a goal. When you're trying to get lots of people to all move in the same direction, it can be really difficult. The collective action principle highlights the challenges that exist in trying to get lots of people to move in the same direction together. One of the biggest challenges is something called the free rider problem. The free rider problem is the idea that individuals are able to enjoy the benefits of something without contributing to the cost of that thing. So, for example, if you don't live in Whitfield County, you're still able to drive on the roads, you can go to the parks, you can enjoy all of the amenities of that community, even if you don't pay taxes in that place. Think about when you go on vacation. You're not paying taxes in that place to upkeep the roads and the parks, but you still get to use them when you go visit those places. Fourth is the policy principle. Policy, which are the outcomes of governments, the things that a government does to try to solve a problem are the result of those first three principles all working together. So, individual goals, which is that rationality principle, meets with group efforts, which are the collective action principle, and they operate within a set of rules and structures, which are the institutional principle. Because it's a complex process, trying to make change happen is also hard. It's often hard. That means that groups are going to have to compromise, give here to take here. There's going to have to be collaboration that works in order to make policy happen. So the policy principle simply acknowledges it's hard to get things done, and you're going to have to compromise in order to do that. Finally is the history principle. The history principle simply acknowledges that how we got where we are matters. Current political outcomes are shaped by past events and decisions. It's a concept known as path dependency. Where we've been affects where we're going. Think about it like driving your car. If you're driving your car and you take a left and then a right and a left and a right, and you keep making turns, at some point, the places you can go are limited because of the turns you made in the past. The choices that we have as a country, our ability to do certain things are directly affected by the choices that we've made in the past. And so historical choices limit our current options because the past has created rules, made alliances, shaped points of view, and all of those things are really difficult to change once they're in place. Now we're going to shift our conversation to government and try to address what government is and what government should do. Government is simply the organizations that people set up to protect their communities and enforce established rules. So basically, once we decide that we're going to have a society, we decide that we're going to set up a set of rules for how things should be governed, how things should run. We need to set up structures to help that happen. So if we say we're going to set up a society where people have to treat each other kindly and nobody can steal from each other and no one can murder anybody, we need to then set up structures that help us to enforce those rules. So if no one can kill anybody, who's going to make sure that happens? So we create police. And we need to make sure that if the community were to get into some emergency situation, something were to set on fire, catch on fire, how do we put it out? Well, we create emergency services and we create fire and we firemen and we create policemen and we create hospitals so that we can take care of people when they're sick. Government is all about how we set up structures to help us run our societies effectively. The main functions of government are what we call allocation, distribution, and stabilization. Allocation simply says that the government's job is to make sure that resources are divided by public goods and private goods. We'll spend some time in class talking about the distinction between those two. Second, the distribution function says that the government's job is to ensure that income and wealth are distributed fairly across society. Finally is the stabilization function. This says that the job of the government is to ensure that there's high employment, that prices remain relatively stable, so there's not a lot of fluctuations in prices, so prices aren't always too high or too low, and that the economy is growing at an appropriate rate. This leads to something known as the power problem. The power problem in politics is a multidimensional idea that really centers on the challenges and consequences that come with power in the government. These problems tend to exist at both the individual, a national, and an international level. On an individual level, power can take a lot of different forms. Power can cause decreased empathy and perspective taking. So powerful people tend to be less accurate at reading other people's emotions. They're less likely to feel compassion, and they struggle to understand other people's points of view. Power can also lead to unethical behavior, where a person with power is more likely to engage in self-interested or unethical action and break the rules. It can also cause them to be overconfident, take excessive risks, and overestimate their own control over their abilities, which can result in poor decision making. And finally, those that have power often demean and bully and objectify people who are weaker than them, particularly in situations where there's not a lot of oversight. When it comes to our national level politics, the power problem tends to deal more with the structure and distribution of authority, meaning what happens when power is concentrated in a small group of people. That can lead us to authoritarianism, what we talked about before, a system where power rests in the hands of a small group of people. This can lead to a lack of accountability and can also start to suppress individual freedoms. There are some who would argue that we're starting to see this happen now. The government's becoming more powerful, the military and police forces have become more involved in sort of day-to-day domestic issues. And so there are some that are saying that that leads to the suppression of individual freedoms, while others argue that it's necessary to ensure the peace and tranquility of the state. We also see problems that arise in checks and balances. We have a system that relies on something called checks and balances, or the idea that each branch of government has the power to check the authority of other branches of government. If one branch starts to overreach, or if partisanship, so that's the idea that Republicans need to side with Republicans or Democrats always need to side with Democrats, if that becomes too powerful, we can end up with government dysfunction. Finally, critics argue that in modern politics, power is often used to serve the interests of the wealthy or of powerful people rather than the general public. This can lead to the public becoming angry or not believing that the government is actually working in their behalf. Finally, we look at the power problem in international relations. So, in the global arena, how does power matter in the world? And we see this mostly play out through military and economic might. So, we look at how the United States has sort of maintained power around the world throughout its history, and a lot of it has been military. And so, there are some who argue that our focus on military power has led to an over reliance on armed rebellion or armed intervention, that we show up places and we are always looking to and trying to pick a fight. Others would argue, well, we're just trying to keep peace in the world because people look to us and now that's become sort of our job. It is often challenging to balance power in our own community, in our own nation, with power other places. And then finally, when a nation has as much power as we do, we have to be careful that we don't overstretch, we don't sort of impart our morals on other countries, and that we don't believe that we're the only group that has solutions for problems that may arise. So this leads to something called the trade-off perspective. And this is the idea that in our political system, freedom and order both exist. Freedom is your ability to do whatever you want to do, free from interference from other people. Order is the need for the government to create and maintain public safety and appropriate society-based codes of conduct. It is important to understand that order and freedom are mutually exclusive, meaning the more you have of one, the less you have of the other. If you have more order and structure and rules, you're going to have less freedom. If you have more freedom, then you can't have rules and structure that hold people down and constrain people. So we're going to finish up by talking about what government does. You can find what the role of government should be in the preamble to the Constitution. It says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America." Flowery language, but it lays out the 5 things governments are supposed to do. 1, establish justice. 2, ensure domestic tranquility. 3, provide for the common defense. 4, promote the general welfare. And 5, secure the blessings of liberty. So let's talk briefly about each one of those. Establishing justice. Justice is just the basic idea that people are treated fairly. From a government perspective, that means that people are treated fairly by the government. Justice is critical because it's not just about punishment, it's a complex ideal about what people are owed, how the society should function, and ensures that everybody has a chance to be successful. Justice often requires big, high level change that goes beyond simple legal actions and really asks us to explore, what do people deserve in a society? In order to achieve justice, we often subscribe to a social contract. This is the principle where people agree to obey the law. This is called consenting to be governed in exchange for the protection of their rights. Without government, it would be survival of the fittest, right? The social contract, that pact where individuals give up some of their natural rights to gain the protection and benefits of a civil, organized, and safe society, focuses on a couple big ideas. First is this notion of the general will. The idea that collectively citizens want to be safe, they want to try to achieve what we call the common good. They believe that laws are legitimate and that the government has a right to be in power. Sovereignty, which says that power rests with the people, not in a president or a king or one single ruler, and should only be exercised through citizen participation in the lawmaking process. And finally, the notion that freedom is not about just getting to do what you want, but obeying the laws that were established so that society functions smoothly. It's important to understand that one of the biggest challenges in creating a society, and one of the hardest things the government has to do, is try to get everyone to agree on what justice means. Right? We all agree that fairness is important, but we tend to disagree on what fairness actually means. Does it mean that everybody gets the same thing? Does it mean that everybody gets what they need? How do we determine those things? So it's easy to support the idea of equality. It's easy to support the idea of justice. It's hard to figure out what those things mean. Next up, the government should ensure domestic tranquility. This means that the United States government's responsibility is to maintain peace and order and stability within the country. This prevents internal problems, riots, rebellions, and tries to promote a calm environment for the citizens. The rest of the world may be chaotic, but inside of the country is not supposed to be. It's a core goal of the Constitution. It ensures that the United States creates a foundation for prosperity. It avoids internal disorder, both through laws and through the structures we've created to solve disputes peacefully. Remember, back in the day, if I didn't like you and you didn't like me, we'd go out into a field and we'd duel. Now we have rules and structures and courts that help us to solve our disputes. Third, the government should provide for the common defense. This means the federal government's core duty, that's outlined in the preamble, is to protect the nation and its citizens from external threats by establishing and funding a strong military, intelligence, and security forces. This ensures that we remain strong nationally and maintains this idea of peace through strength. We keep ourselves safe because everybody knows how big and powerful we are. This includes funding defense budgets, supporting military families, and addressing some of the global security challenges that exist. Remember, the United States does not exist in a vacuum. We exist in a world with a lot of other countries that also have their own interests and concerns. Fourth, the job of the government is to promote the general welfare. This means that the government should act for the overall health, happiness, and prosperity of all of its people, not just a select few. This means that the nation should focus on the well being, public safety, good infrastructure. So we want good roads and hospitals and school systems. And we want to promote broad societal benefits. But it's important to remember that this sparks a lot of debate over how powerful should the federal government be? How involved should they be in our day to day lives? And although this is a core principle, it's important to promote the general welfare. How do you figure out what's best in a country of 330 million people? Finally, the job of the government is to secure the blessings of liberty. This means that the government's job is to protect and preserve individual freedoms, rights, and our ability to govern ourselves for not just people who exist today, but for those who will come after us. This ensures that the country will flourish, not just now, but in the future, and it will be free from tyranny. It focuses on protecting civil liberties like free speech, assembly, and due process, and making sure that these benefits are available to those who come after us. So that was an overview of politics and government. Hopefully, that's a good jumping off point. Again, I urge you to read the textbook, use the videos to deepen your understanding. Again, those are found in the course content. And any questions that you have, please feel free to bring them to class next week. All right, have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys in class.